I'm Lieutenant Steve Bushhausen from the Huntington Beach Police Department, and I am the liaison between the City of Huntington Beach and Orange County Animal Control, and also with the California Department of Fish and Game. So any questions, and I know I've spoken with some of you here over the last year and a half. I've been doing this job off and on. So the questions I get, I work with Orange County Animal Control and Fish and Game in dealing with our issues. And obviously tonight we're talking about the issues of coyotes in our urban environment. A while back we had the opportunity to have someone who's an expert in the field to come and talk, and so we set it up a few weeks ago, got it dialed in for tonight, and that brings us here. The way the night's going to work is I have representatives from the Orange County Animal Control, Orange County Animal Care here, also representatives from the California Department of Fish and Game. And then we're lucky to get Lynsey White-Dasher from the Humane Society of the United States to come and speak. So she's going to have her presentation tonight, I think around 45 minutes or an hour. And afterwards, what we'll do is open up for some questions and answers for a short time afterwards. And there's going to be a microphone up in this corner. So once we open it up, if you just want to line up the stairs, and we'll have both all the representatives from Orange County Animal Care, Fish and Game, myself, and Lynsey up here to hopefully answer some of your questions. Okay. So without further ado, this is Lynsey White-Dasher from the Humane Society of the United States.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming this evening to learn about living with coyotes in Huntington Beach. As Lieutenant Bushhausen mentioned, I work for the Humane Society of the United States, and I do a lot of work with communities like yourselves that are having conflicts with coyotes. I've done trainings to animal control officers in more than 100 communities across the country, and many sessions like this for the public. So I've also worked with the largest study of urban coyotes that exists, and that's in Chicago. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But before I start, I just want to, I can't really see any of you. It's like a blinding light, but how many of you have seen coyotes in your neighborhood? You raise your hand? Okay. I can't see a lot, but it looks like almost every hand is up. So great. So you guys are all in the right place, and I'm so happy that you've come. I think you'll get a lot out of this session, and you'll know next time when you see a coyote what to do. How many of you have heard coyotes howling? Good, okay. And how many of you are concerned about your pets? Okay, or maybe your kids? Or okay, all right. Well, we'll cover all of that. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is a few things. I'm going to start with a little bit of a background on coyote ecology and behavior. Then I'll talk about why we have coyotes here in Huntington Beach. Then I'll talk about, of course, what do we do about these coyote conflicts that we already have. And just as a little bit of a preview, I'll let you know that that involves not only changing coyote behavior, but also changing our behavior in some instances. And then I'll give some tips for coexistence. Okay, so just a little bit of background in coyote ecology. Coyotes are originally native to the grasslands of North America, and when you look at them, you can actually see how that is. Coyotes might look pretty large when you look at them, but they're actually pretty scrawny animals. They only weigh about 25 to 35 pounds, but they look a lot larger because they have these really long legs and these big, bushy, furry coats. And they have these long legs to run through the tall grass searching for rodents, which is primarily what they eat. They don't hunt in packs like wolves, and that's again because they're primarily eating small animals like mice, which don't make a very good meal to share with other coyotes. They're very fast. They're, depending on who you ask, the second or third fastest land mammal in North America. And they're incredibly, incredibly smart and adaptable. So these Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner cartoons that you might have seen, coyotes in real life would never fall for those stupid Acme products. They're actually very smart. They would actually catch the Roadrunner. And they're incredibly flexible in where they live and what they eat, which has allowed them to do really well and live just about everywhere in the United States, including here. So what do coyotes eat? Well, this is one of the big reasons for their incredible success. They will eat just about anything. They're actually not carnivores, they're opportunistic omnivores, which means they'll eat pretty much whatever is easiest to eat. But again, most of that is small rodents, so mice, rats, those sorts of things. They're actually providing us a service here, free rodent control. They also eat a lot of fruit. So that might be surprising, but fruit is actually an attractant to coyotes. If you have a fruit tree and there's fruit that's fallen on the ground, that can actually attract coyotes in. They'll even eat grass and insects. And these numbers here are from that big study of coyotes in Chicago that I mentioned. And you'll notice here that out of these percentages, only a very small number, 2%, was human-associated food and 1% domestic cats. So even though there were some coyotes out there causing problems, and I know there are here as well, by and large, the great majority of coyotes are out there eating their natural diet, even when they're living in close proximity to people. So in terms of their social structure, there are two types of coyotes. The first type are resident coyotes. Those are the ones we usually think of. They live in family groups, which typically consist of one breeding pair and then some related individuals, and then their pups. So resident coyotes live in these family groups largely so that they can defend their territory. So these groups have pretty tight, smaller home ranges because they're defending it actively from other coyote family groups. Then there are the transient coyotes. These are the ones that live on their own. They're typically the yearlings that have been kicked out of the group, and they're looking for their own place to call home. So these often have much larger home ranges because they can't defend their territory. They don't have the rest of that family group to defend it with them, so they have these larger overlapping territories. Coyotes are one of the rare animals that actually are monogamous. They actually do stay together for life. Dr. Stan Garrett, who is the lead researcher of that Chicago study, has been quoted as saying that he's never documented a case of divorce of coyotes in the wild. So if one of the pair dies, the other one will find another mate, but they do stay together. So there's three typical biological seasons for coyotes, and the mating season is December through March. So that is when that one pair per family group is getting together and mating. This time of year, coyotes do become more territorial, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later when I talk about attacks on pets. But during this time of year, especially if there's a larger dog that is in the home range of a mating pair, they might, especially if it's an unleashed dog, they might view that dog as a threat to their territory. Both the male and the female help raise the pups, and they have the ability to adjust their litter size based on how much food is available and also how many other coyotes there are at that time of year. If there is less food one year, they'll have less coyotes. If it's a great year on pups, they'll have more pups. At the same time, if a population of coyotes has been killed off, whether that's natural causes or if there's been a large trapping or hunting season, the ones that are left will compensate by having more pups. So pup rearing season, we're getting here to the end of this. This is May through August. This is the only time of year that coyotes will use a den. So the rest of the time of the year, they're not using a den. They're sleeping out, under cover, but pretty much out in the open. They're much more, they take up a much larger portion of their home range. When coyotes have pups this time of year, their movement, especially when the pups are small, are more localized to that den site. So we do see conflict sometimes with pets around a particular den site, especially with off-leash dogs, and I'll talk about that. So the pups stay in the den for about 6 weeks. Then they go out hunting with their parents. And then dispersal season, we're coming up on this now, September through December. That's when those yearling coyotes go off and become those transient coyotes. Okay, so habitat needs of coyotes. Well, coyotes can live just about anywhere. When they did that study in Chicago, they have actually radio collared over 600 coyotes now, and they expected to see coyotes largely in the forest preserve areas. But they actually found that coyotes were living everywhere. They were living right next to people's subdivisions, right next to highways. And most of the time, people had absolutely no idea that they were there because they were coming out at night and avoiding people. We also saw that within their home range, they actually showed a preference to the natural areas. So some of these coyotes have very, very urbanized home ranges with just small little patches of natural land. But we found that they spend the majority of their time in these natural patches of land. So they're going out of their way to avoid people. How many people have seen this picture before? Just a couple of you, okay. This is a coyote that actually, this is a Quiznos sub shop in downtown Chicago, and this is a coyote that, it was a hot summer day and the door was open, and this coyote just wandered in and sat in the Snapple cooler, and just sat there. He wasn't menacing or bothering anyone, and some people even continued eating their sandwiches, and then animal control came and got the coyote and took him off, and this was in the middle of downtown Chicago. And what I found interesting about this story is not just that it happened, but it was the public's reaction to it. So, of course, this was a big story, and all the media outlets were there, and they were interviewing people. And they asked people, what do you think about this? And person after person said, well, what the heck is the coyote doing in downtown Chicago? And the truth is, there are a lot of coyotes in downtown Chicago. They're just not doing this kind of thing. They're keeping secret. So in other words, they go out of their way to avoid people. Okay, so why do we have coyotes here in Huntington Beach? Well, first of all, just like everywhere in the U.S., we have less and less. This is just a picture of the U.S. at night. You can see all the urbanization that's going on, including here in Southern California. But the amount of habitat available to wildlife has incredibly decreased compared to these amount of development. So there's less and less areas for them to live in these natural areas that we would like them to live. But at the same time, coyotes do really, really well living in urbanized areas. And what the reasons for that, just like most reasons why we have wildlife, are because there's plenty of habitat and there's plenty of food. So when people learned that coyotes are in their neighborhood for the first time, a lot of people think that coyotes have run out of food and they've come into our neighborhood to eat our dogs and our cats. And that's not really what's going on. There's plenty of natural food for coyotes to eat here. There's plenty of rodents, plenty of small mammals, plenty of plants, things that they eat that are here. And so they're helping to balance the ecosystem in that regard. And another important thing, there's very little competition here for them. We don't have a lot of wolves and bears. You don't have any of those here in our urban areas. You do have some mountain lions, but they aren't as, they're not here as much as coyotes are. So, there's plenty of food here. They're literally the top dog, and they have plenty of space and habitat. So even though they have plenty of things to eat, they are going to eat whatever is easiest. So if we're leaving things outside for them to eat, they're going to take advantage of that. Pet food and water outside is a huge attractant for coyotes. Unsecured garbage, messy bird feeders, that might not sound obvious, but what it is the spilled bird seed on the ground attracts rodents like mice and squirrels, and that attracts coyotes. Gardens, compost piles, even small pets that are unattended, and I'll talk more about this in a moment, can be attractants for coyotes. And of course, intentional feeding, people that leave food outside, whether that's for their pets or for feral cats or even raccoons or other wildlife, those all draw coyotes in. So coyotes are very smart, and they will learn. They will learn that if they come into a neighborhood and there's free food for them and they don't have to do anything for it and they can eat it for free and nothing bad happens to them, they will learn. And they will take advantage of that. So I want to just go through the various types of coyote conflicts now and talk about what do they mean, why do they happen, and what can we do about it. So almost everybody here said you've seen a coyote. So what does that mean? Well, seeing a coyote during the daytime is not necessarily a cause for concern. Coyotes are naturally most active at dawn and dusk. When they do live in areas that have a lot of people, they tend to become more nocturnal to avoid us. But it's perfectly natural to see them out during the day, as long as when they see you, they run away and they appear afraid of you. Okay, so again, most coyotes are never seen by people despite living nearby. However, and I'm sure some of you have seen coyotes like this, coyotes can become habituated or lose their fear of people. And this generally happens when a couple of things happen. That's when they learn that neighborhoods are a source of food, and when they learn that people are not scary. So if a coyote learns that they can come into a neighborhood and eat some trash and nothing bad happens to them, they're smart, and then they test us. They test us almost like dogs or children. Then the next time they might come into someone's yard, and then, oh look, here's some food scraps in the yard. Oh, and nothing bad happened to me. Well, then maybe next time they'll come a little closer. Hey, look, there's dog food on the porch. and nothing bad happens. And the thing is that we have actually taught coyotes this. We have taught coyotes to become habituated and lose their fear of people. I wonder how many of you, when you saw a coyote, I wonder what you did. And I won't ask, but the first time I saw a coyote, I thought, wow, that was really neat. And I looked at him, and if I had a camera, I probably would have stopped and taken a picture. But what was I doing? I was telling that coyote that people are not scary. So when we see coyotes and we don't react and we don't act big and loud and scare them away, they learn that we're not a threat. So we have to reverse that way of thinking. So again, coyotes become habituated when they learn the neighborhoods are a source of food for all of these reasons. A lot of these things you might not even realize that you're doing or your neighbors are doing and they don't realize it. And of course, again, as I mentioned, habituation is a learned behavior. But the good news is we can reteach them and coyotes learn really fast. Okay, so how do we prevent coyote conflicts? Okay, so in terms of pets, will coyotes attack pets? Well, we know there have been some instances here of attacks on pets. So again, coyotes normally hunt small rodents, but unattended pets, and I do want to stress unattended pets, so that's a pet that's not on a leash, or when there's not a person close by, especially small dogs and cats are at risk of coyote attack. And the reason for that is that these small animals, when there's not a person nearby or next to them, they look very similar to what a coyote would naturally eat. They're about the same size and shape of a rabbit or a groundhog, and if there's a person next to that dog or cat, then the coyote should be afraid of the person. But if there's not a person there, they don't understand that this is a pet, this is something that they're not supposed, that is not a prey item. So, and also larger breed dogs, it's much more rare that they are attacked by coyotes, but when they are, it's typically during that breeding season. So again, that's December or January through March. And again, this is often unleashed dogs that are passing through a coyote's territory, and the coyotes view that dog as a threat. And sometimes, and usually what happens is they'll just kind of follow the dogs to see what happens. Sometimes people are walking a large dog on a leash, maybe through a park in breeding season, and the coyote follows them. What's usually happening there is that the coyote is just following to see where the person and the dog are going. And as long as they go out of their territory, they'll leave them alone. But especially if the dog provokes the coyote, then sometimes there can be an incident there. And then also sometimes during pup season, if there's a den close by and the coyote feels that a dog is a threat. So in terms of preventing pet attacks, it's all about taking some extra precautions with our pets. Since we know that there's coyotes around, there are some certain things that we have to do to protect our pets. So if you can, you always want to be with your pet when they're outside. If you can avoid letting your dog or cat outside when you're not out there with them and they're not on a leash, that really is the best way. Otherwise, at least keeping them inside at night is important. Also, when you're walking your dog, it's really important to have them on a leash, and ideally a leash that's 6 feet long or less. If you have one of those retractable leashes and your dog is 20 feet away from you, the coyote might not even know that that dog is with you. Might not even see that long retractable leash. So that's important. If you are with your pet and you see a coyote, there's a couple of things that you can do, but essentially you want the coyote to be looking at you and not at your pet. So you could pick up your pet, put them behind you. You just want to make sure that the coyote's focused on you, because then you're going to scare the coyote away. I'll talk about that in a minute. This seems obvious, but I've known of some cases where people have allowed their dogs to play with coyotes, and this is something that you definitely don't want to do. It might seem innocent at first, but dogs just don't understand coyote signals and body language, and sometimes that can become violent. So make sure you don't do that. Okay, so just to recap, and we have a lot of fact sheets on these I can give you information about. You can take these, print these out, and take these with you. But just to recap, small dogs, again, it's especially important to be with them when they're outside. And really small dogs, you have to be vigilant all year round with small dogs. Always use a leash and pick up your dog if you see a coyote. Large dogs, again, it's best if you don't let them outside unattended ever, but especially be vigilant January through March. That's the breeding season. Always use a leash and don't allow your dog to play with a coyote. Okay, so cats. Really, unfortunately, the only way to ensure the safety of your cat, not just from coyotes, but from other animals like raccoons or other wildlife, is to keep them inside. That really is the best way. But there are some things you can do to let them outside that are safe. You can use a leash and a harness. I actually do this with my cat, and my neighbor thinks that I'm crazy, but my cats enjoy it, and it's their way that they get to go outside. You can buy a cat enclosure or build a catio. Just something to allow your cats to be outside and provide some protection. If you have cats that are outside, or if you care for an outdoor colony of cats, there are some things that you can do. Again, if you can bring them inside at night, that's best. In terms of feeding, you want to make sure that you're not leaving pet food outside all the time, because the pet food is an attractant for the coyotes, and that will lure them in and then further endanger your cats. So if you can feed them inside, that's best, or just feed them at one time a day and pick up the food as soon as you're done, or even provide a little shelter they can go in that the coyotes can't go into, something elevated, and provide some sort of shelter for them if you can. And we have some of these examples on our website too. I can give you more information about. Okay, so again, the best protection is to never leave pets unattended, but in terms of your yard, there are some things that you can do to better protect your yard. Fences do have to be at least 6 feet tall to prevent coyotes from coming in the yard. Coyotes can easily jump over a fence that is less than 6 feet tall. If it's 6 feet tall or taller, what they have to do is jump up onto the fence and then jump off. And they do it pretty quickly, so you don't necessarily notice. But what you can do is do something to the top of the fence, and I'll show you some examples here in a minute, that keep them from getting that grip on and pushing back off. Then also remember that coyotes can dig. So you want to make sure that you have reinforced the bottom of your fence so they can't dig under. Coyotes also they are ambush predators. So they like to hide in vegetation before they pounce and make their attack. So if you can eliminate some of those hiding spots around your yard, that'll further protect your pets. So you don't have to remove all of the brush around your yard, but trimming up a couple inches underneath it will allow you to look out and see that there's not a coyote waiting there in your bushes before you let your pets outside. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you don't have other things attracting coyotes into your yard before you let your pets outside. Motion-activated lights or sprinklers could be helpful. I don't have good information about how well these work, but they could work at least in the short term to help scare coyotes away from your property. Okay, so here's some pictures I just want to show to sort of demonstrate a little bit about what I was talking about. So if this were your yard in here, and this were your fence, first of all, this fence here is only a 4-foot tall fence. This, of course, is not going to deter a coyote at all. So, and also look at all of this great brush here where a coyote could be hiding. So if this were your house and you let your dog outside and then you just went back inside and didn't pay attention, you could easily see how a coyote could be waiting there to jump over the fence. As compared to this yard, where you still have this fence that's not going to deter a coyote at all, but at least you don't have that vegetation you can see when you let your dog outside. Hopefully you'll be out there with your dog too. This is a inexpensive, yet I will admit unattractive solution for securing the top of your fence. Again, any of these things can only be used with a fence that's 6 feet tall, at least 6 feet tall, in order to be effective. A better solution here is something called the coyote roller, and you can find this on coyoteroller.com. And what it is a very loosely rolling pipe, which when the coyote tries to jump on and push off and go over the fence, it can't get a grip and push off. It actually rolls backwards. So this also works if you have a dog that likes to escape out of your fence. It'll help keep your dog inside and keep coyotes outside. So they sell these on this website. They have a lot of different colors that you can match to your fence. Again, this is a fence at least 6 feet tall. You can also try to make one of these on your own with just some loosely rolling PVC piping, just loosely enough so they can't get a grip. So these can be effective. Okay, so do coyotes attack people? Whenever we start having conflicts in neighborhoods, especially when there's attacks on pets, this is naturally what people often start to worry about. And I'm sure some of you, especially if you have small kids, are worried about this happening. one of the things that I did in my research was to do an analysis of all of the incidents of coyotes biting people that I could find throughout the United States and Canada, going back to the early 1900s. And I actually found only about 162 cases throughout that whole time, which averages to about less than 12 bites per year. So they're very rare compared to the number of dog bites, which are 4.7 million every year. It's a very small number. But it is something that happens, and is something that we should be cognizant of and take seriously when it happens. But we also want to keep in mind the true risk of this happening. So out of those attacks that I found, almost all of them involved minor injuries. And in the cases where information was available, a lot of these incidents, they couldn't find the particular coyote, or they just didn't keep data about it, or they didn't follow up very well because, the officers were very busy and didn't have the resources. But in the cases where we were able to follow up, many were feeding or pet related. This is one of the more ridiculous examples, but one of the examples was in Colorado. It was a McDonald's drive-through where people had been feeding coyotes through the window, feeding a coyote French fries through the drive-through window. The coyote came up and they fed it French fries. And then a poor innocent customer pulled up through the drive-through, and the coyote came up to her window, and she didn't know she was supposed to feed the coyote French fries, and so he bit her. And that's how a lot of these things happen, or coyotes start to associate people with food, and then when they don't feed them, they come up and they become aggressive. So this all goes back to feeding. We want to make sure that we're not feeding coyotes, whether that's intentionally or unintentionally. So again, we definitely want to be cognizant of, we want to take extra precautions with our pets and with our kids and with ourselves, but we also want to keep in mind the true risk of this. You're more likely to be killed by a champagne cork or a golf ball than you are to be bitten by a coyote. So, okay, in terms of kids, kids are not more likely to be bitten by a coyote. Adults are just as likely to be bitten than kids, but we want to take some extra precaution with kids, of course. So the most important things are, don't leave small children unattended outside if possible. If you see a coyote, pick up your kid and again, focus the coyote on you so you can scare it away. And, teaching children tips about strange dogs or animals is helpful as well. Not just about coyotes, but about dogs in general. So again, kids are much more likely to be bitten by a domestic dog than they are coyotes. So it's really good to just teach kids, never approach any dog or animal that looks like a dog unless an adult says it's okay. So just some general tips. This is the acronym, I think, by the state of Colorado, Be Smart. Essentially, they just want us to stop, make themselves look big and loud, make noise, back away slowly, and tell an adult. The most important thing, and this is not just for kids but for adults as well, is never to run away from a coyote. Just like pretty much any predator, like a mountain lion or a bear. If you run away from a predator like a coyote, it initiates their chasing predatory response, and so a lot of children that have been bitten is because they have run away from a coyote. But again, that's very rare. So you want to teach kids, if they see something that looks like a coyote, be big and loud, yell for an adult. Don't run away. Okay, so when we have some of these coyote conflicts going on, what do we do about it? So to address coyote conflicts, we have to have two parts of the puzzle. And the first part is to change coyote behavior. So those coyotes that are going out there and attacking pets or have become habituated, we do need to change that behavior. But we do need to change some of our behaviors that have contributed to that as well. So again, in terms of changing our behavior, we want to make sure that we've eliminated all of those food attractants, and we want to take precautions with our pets, and teach kids to recognize a coyote, never feed an animal they don't know, and yell for an adult, and not to run if they see a coyote. But how do we address coyote behavior? Well, this is where we have a few more options. The traditional approach has been to remove coyotes, whether that's on a large scale, so through a bounty or a shooting or trapping program, or on a more limited scale, so to find those particular problem coyotes and remove them from the population, relocating them, moving them somewhere else, or hazing them, which is a training tool for training problem coyotes to be afraid of people again and stop that problematic behavior that they're exhibiting. So unfortunately, even though it sounds really great at first, relocation just doesn't work. Just like most predatory animals, when you relocate a coyote, they essentially will do whatever they can to get back home. So the Chicago study monitored 12 coyotes that were relocated. None of them stayed where they were put. They all were trying to get back home, and they all died in the process. So usually one of two things happen. They aren't familiar with the roads in the area, and they get hit by a car. Or, when you're putting them in this ideal coyote spot where you think that they should go, of course there's already going to be coyotes there. And those new coyotes are not going to appreciate, or those, established coyotes are not going to appreciate these new coyotes coming in, so they get in disputes that way. So not only does it not work, and it's very expensive and time-consuming to do, but it's also very stressful for the coyotes, and they end up dying anyway. So usually we propose this solution because we don't want to harm the coyote, we just don't want them here. But unfortunately, the truth is it is very stressful and usually a lethal option. So it's not something that we do. Okay, so in terms of removing coyotes on a large scale, the thought being here that if we try to reduce the overall population of coyotes, then we'll have less conflicts because we have less coyotes around. That unfortunately, we've been actually doing this for hundreds of years, and we have found that doesn't work either. And there's a few reasons for this. One, as I mentioned before, when you reduce the coyote population, the ones that are left will have more pups to compensate for that. At the same time, if you remove coyotes from a certain area, remember those transient coyotes out there that are looking for a new home range? They're going to say, hey, look, here's a new place we can move in, and they're going to come and move into that area. A lot of interesting things happen also. If you kill the dominant female in a group, a lot of times what will happen, so she's typically the only one breeding, but if you kill her, what happens is a lot of times all the other females in the group will start breeding. So you would have only had one in a group breeding, now you'll have 3 breeding per group. So you can see how this sort of thing happens. So we've even seen communities that have done this see more coyotes by the time they're done. So we know this hasn't worked. Again, we've been doing this. We've been killing hundreds of thousands of coyotes every year, and we have more coyotes now living in more places than they ever have before. But there have been, people that have studied this thinking, well, if we kill enough coyotes, then clearly there has to be some point where, we do decrease the population. So they did a study actually in Colorado where they took 92 coyotes and they split them into 2 groups. One group where they killed some of the coyotes in the group, and one group where they left them alone. And in the group where they killed some of the coyotes, they actually every year reduced the population by 61 to 75%. And they did this for 7 years. And at the end of the 7 years, within 8 months, that population was back up to where it was before. So if you can imagine, if you decided here in Huntington Beach you're going to try to reduce the coyote population by 75%, first of all, that would be an immense investment of time and resources. It usually takes thousands of dollars to catch just a couple coyotes, to hire someone skilled enough to do that. And if you remove 75%, I can't even imagine what that would cost. But then in 8 months, you could be back where you started. I don't think that would, most of you would consider that a good investment of time and resources. So in this study, they found that the mean litter size doubled, so they had twice the number of pups. They found, interestingly, they started having more female pups, which is interesting. And they started breeding at an earlier age as well. Okay, so a better option instead is to try to just identify those particular coyotes that are causing a problem and just remove those from the population. And that's what a lot of communities do. And there's some problems with that as well, though. First of all, it's really, really difficult to catch a problem coyote. Coyotes are very, very smart. It's very hard to get them to go into a trap. For every trap you set up to catch a coyote, you'll probably catch dozens of raccoons and possums and probably cats and dogs. And there are people, and it's also very difficult to determine who that coyote is that's causing the problem and make sure that that coyote gets caught in the trap. There are some, skilled people out there that can do this, but they typically charge thousands of dollars and take several weeks to do it because they set up cameras, they do a lot of reconnaissance work to actually identify that particular coyote and remove them from the population. But what happens when you remove that coyote from the population? Well, you have to remember, first of all, that by and large, most coyotes are not causing a problem. So if you have a problem coyote, you have to stop and consider why that situation happened. So again, once you remove this coyote from the population, you're creating a vacancy that's going to be filled by those transient coyotes. And then, again, you might end up with more after you've trapped. But then again, if you have this empty home range and you have a new coyote moving in, he may become a problem coyote too. Because why did that first coyote become a problem coyote? Is it because he was being fed? Was there pet food around? Were there dogs running around loose, unattended? If that's still going on, you're going to keep having this cycle continue. So the problem with this is it doesn't address the root cause of conflicts. It doesn't teach us anything about how to coexist with coyotes. And it doesn't teach coyotes anything. So when you kill a coyote, that coyote is dead. He hasn't learned anything. And his family members haven't learned anything either. So we're not teaching coyotes anything either by doing this. Okay, so which brings me to hazing. So hazing is another way of dealing with problem coyotes. So essentially, it's taking a coyote that has lost their fear of people and reinstilling that natural fear of coyotes, of people, back into them. So there's a variety of ways that you can do this. So next time you see a coyote, and I assume most of you will, since you have already, I want you to be scary. I want you to scare that coyote away. There's a lot of ways you can do this. The easiest way is just to look at the coyote and yell and wave your arms and say, "Go away, coyote." You can carry a whistle with you, whistle at the coyote. You can have an air horn, can just make a little noise to the coyote. There are tools you can make. This is just a sippy cup with some pennies in it, but it actually is rather loud. You can take a soda can with dead batteries, put that inside, cover it with duct tape. If you're out in your garden and you see a coyote, a great thing to do is take your water hose and spray it on him. Have a squirt gun. If you have one of those super soakers, keep it by your back door. You can even put a little bit of vinegar in it or ammonia. And when you see that coyote, squirt the coyote, especially if you have one of those long-range super soakers. Bang pots and pans. Essentially, you just want to be scary to that coyote. And essentially what we're doing is we're training them. We're marking our territory in a way that they understand. So a lot of you said that you've heard coyotes howling. So when coyotes are howling, they're marking their territory to other coyotes. They're saying, "Hey, this is our territory, stay away." So when we use an air horn or a whistle, we're saying, "Hey, this is my yard, stay out of my yard, you're not welcome here." And they understand that. Also, the great thing about this is that they learn this information and pass it on to their family members and their pups. So in the same way that when a coyote learns that, "Hey, Bob's yard has a free pet food, let's go eat it," they'll pass that information on to their family members and their pups. But if they come and they say, "Wait a minute, Bob's neighborhood's really, his yard's scary, there's loud noises," they'll tell that to their pups and family members as well. So when you haze one coyote, you're actually reaching that whole group, which is great. And so again, we are reestablishing their natural fear of humans, marking our territory in a way they can understand. And the beauty of this is that anybody can do it. Everybody in this room, you don't have to be a wildlife biologist or an animal control officer or a police officer. Everybody here can do it. Everyone should do it. Because one of the most important things is also to never ignore, and especially to run from a coyote. Because every time that we ignore a coyote, we are contributing to that habituation of the coyote. So it's important for everyone to do it. So, if we leave here tonight and everybody on this half of the room says, "Yes, I'm going to do this," and you see a coyote and you blow your whistle at him, and you guys are all scaring coyotes away, but then everybody over here says, "That was the stupidest thing I've ever heard, I'm not doing that," and you just ignore coyotes, then you're going to sort of cancel each other out a little bit. So everybody needs to be involved. Everyone should do this. Okay, so everyone can do this. There are a lot of ways to do it. There are probably there are less wrong ways to do it than there are right ways. There are a lot of right ways to do it, but there are just a few simple rules that you have to keep in mind, a few very important rules. The first one is you have to have a connection with the coyote in order to haze it. So this might sound silly and stupid, but if you're hiding behind a bush and blowing a whistle or shooting a paintball gun at a coyote, they're not going to understand what's happening. And good animal control officers have done this. They've hidden behind a bush and shot coyotes. But the thing is, if they're shot with a paintball gun and they don't see a person, they don't understand that that threat came from a person. Same thing if you're in your car and you're honking the horn. That doesn't work. Number one, because coyotes hear horns honking all the time. They're used to traffic noise. But secondly, they see a car. They don't necessarily understand that's coming from a person. So you need to get out of your car and wave your arms and yell. Same thing if you're in your house and you're leaning out your window in the second floor. That probably won't work either. So you want to make sure the coyote's looking at you, and then you go ahead and do your hazing. And again, if you have a pet or a child with you, that's why you want to put yourself in between the child and the pet, because you want the coyote looking at you, not distracted by your pet or your kid. So this is the second most important rule about hazing. You must completely haze the coyote until they leave the area. So a lot of times when you haze a coyote that's never been hazed before, especially if it's a very habituated coyote, they will do one of two things. They will either just look at you, or they will run away a little bit and stop and look at you. And that's because they have no idea what you're doing. And again, they're testing you. They're looking to see what happens. And if you blow your whistle and they just sit there and look at you, or run away 10 feet and stop and look at you, and you decide, oh, well, that didn't work. All right, oh well. Or you decide, well, I'm done. I did my job. Then you have taught that coyote that all he has to do is wait a few seconds or a couple minutes and you'll leave. That's all he's learned. So you want to make sure that you continue hazing until they run away. Now, you don't have to chase them, miles down the road, just until they're out of your sight. So when we're hazing coyotes, we're not sending them out of their home range. We're not moving them to the next city over. They're still, their home range are miles large. We're just encouraging them to go to, areas where there's a little less people, but more importantly, usually it's to come out later at night, to come out when we're not around. So how do you do this? So if the coyote is just sitting there looking at you, there's a couple things you can do. A lot of people aren't comfortable with this, and that's fine, but one of the easiest ways is to actually run towards the coyote a little bit. The reason that hazing works is because coyotes' first response to a threat is to run away. So have those long legs, that's what they do, is they run away. So if you walk or run towards them a little bit, they're going to run away. But I know not everyone's comfortable with that, and that's fine. So just get louder, get bigger, combine a couple of methods. If you have someone with you, get them joining in the effort. Just continue doing it until they run away. Okay, so a variety of methods and hazers is important. It doesn't necessarily matter what tool you use. It doesn't matter if it's a water hose or a whistle or an air horn. But if everybody here starts blowing whistles at coyotes and that's all we're doing, they might learn that, this really isn't a threat, and they might become habituated to the whistle. So it is good if we use a variety of tactics. But even more important is that we have a variety of people. So that's why, as I mentioned before, it's so important that everybody gets involved. So if we leave this just to police officers or animal control officers, coyotes are going to learn pretty quickly that, those men and women in the dark blue uniforms or whatever uniforms they wear are scary. And when they see them, they're going to run away from them. But when they see you and me and everyday people walking their dogs, they're not going to be scared. So that's why all of us, in all different shapes and sizes, have to be hazing coyotes. This one also seems obvious, but only use this when you actually have a connection with the coyote. So in other words, if you decide, you're going to wear your whistle every time you go walk your dog in the park, and when you see a coyote, you're going to blow the whistle, that's perfect. But if you decide, well, just to be safe, I'm just going to blow my whistle every time I walk through the park, just in case, that's not going to work because the coyote will just get habituated to that. So only when you see the coyote. And then this might sound like it's a lot of work, but usually only 2 to 3 times per coyote, and actually per coyote family group, is all that's needed to send that coyote a message. And typically the first time requires more effort, then it gets easier the second time, the third time, much easier. Okay, so just a few tips. Again, this is all based on the premise that coyotes will run away, and they will as long as they can. It's very clear that the coyote is sick or injured and can't get up. Don't haze them. You know, this is the time to call your police or animal control officer. And again, make sure they have an escape route. You want to make sure they can run away, so don't corner them. And then again, young children, they can use all of these techniques. You probably wouldn't want to encourage them to run towards a coyote, but they can be big and loud, walk away slowly. And most important, again, is not to run. Okay, so I just want to, for a moment, talk about an example of a community program that uses hazing and uses a community effort to do this. And that's in Denver, Colorado. So in 2008, they had a lot of coyote problems, a lot of sightings, attacks on dogs, including large dogs, even some attacks on people. And actually, they keep really good records in Colorado, and every single one of them that we could find was pet or feeding related. So they had gone through the cycle of trapping and killing coyotes before. They had, they'd have problems. They would hire someone to come in and trap coyotes. And they just found that they kept coming back to this cycle of this. They just found that it wasn't working. They just kept having this cycle. So they decided instead to do something else. And they came up with this management plan that focused on collecting data, education, and then hazing. So anytime they had a problem coyote, they used hazing as their tool for changing behavior. And what they found 4 years into the program is that it's been very successful. In the city and county of Denver, which is where this program is, no one has been bitten since this happened. Their pet attacks have significantly decreased. They have not had to lethally remove any coyotes. And the hazing has been so effective that they started getting angry phone calls from people wanting to know what they did with all the coyotes. And the truth is, they're still there. Again, we're not moving them away. They're just avoiding us now. So it's just a graph showing, how those conflicts declined. Okay, so I just want to go now through a few examples, and these are all from Denver. And is Dawn in our audience? Are you here? Yay, she took this picture. This is of a coyote in Central Park, right across the street, and I use this picture in all my presentations, so thank you. She took a lot of great pictures that were in this presentation. So anyway, this is an example. This is the pictures of a coyote in Central Park, but the story is actually from a park in Denver called Bible Park, but it can be very similar to situations that you have had here. So there was a very habituated group of coyotes in the park. Kind of like this coyote, they were just lounging in plain view of people in the daytime. There were people close by. They were not running away. They clearly were not afraid of people. They were attacking dogs, including large dogs. They were following joggers. They were doing all kinds of things that a lot of communities would have decided to, close down the park, maybe set out some traps and remove the coyote. And Denver had done that in the past, but they decided to try something different because they had found that wasn't working. So what they did instead was to have their park staff go out every morning for 3 weeks and haze the coyotes. And so they went out, they used pots and pans, whistles, all kinds of things. And after 3 weeks, and still to this day, this was actually 4 years ago, they've had no more instances of dog attacks in the park. They've had no more instances of coyotes stalking people. The coyotes are no longer lying out in plain view of people. They actually have basically become invisible to the park goers that go there. If you look in this picture, you can actually see, I think this is of a coyote in that park. They're there. The park staff see them in the early morning hours hunting rodents, but the park goers don't see them anymore. This is actually the place where that person called and wants to know where all the coyotes went. They're still there. They're just making themselves scarce to people. And this was all done with hazing. This is just an example of a resident that, like a lot of you, had seen coyotes in his yard, and he went to one of the little hazing training sessions that the county of Denver has. Sort of like what we're doing tonight, but they do theirs on a little smaller scale, just informal in neighborhoods. And this man had attended the training because he had a small dog, and he had seen a coyote in his neighbor's yard several times, and he was afraid to let his dog outside. So he went to the training, and then he came back from the training, and one evening he was going to let his dog outside, but first he looked and he saw the coyote in his neighbor's driveway across the street. So what he did is he remembered, he said, okay, I will try this hazing thing. And he stepped out onto his front porch, and he opened his door, stepped out onto his front porch, and started yelling and waving his arms, "Go away, coyote!" And the coyote just looked at him, did not react at all. And so the man remembered he needed to intensify his hazing, and he actually ran towards the coyote, yelling and waving his arms, and he actually got within 6 feet of that coyote before the coyote ran away, but then he took off and ran away. The next time, a few evenings later, the man saw that coyote, and this time he opened up his front door, stepped onto his porch, started yelling and waving his arms, and that time the coyote ran away as soon as he started yelling. The third time the man saw the coyote, all he did was open up his front door, and the coyote ran away. And that was the last time he ever saw that coyote. So this is a pretty typical example. Again, it's pretty rare that you have to run within 6 feet of a coyote, and you don't need to run towards a coyote at all. But this man did. And again, the first time it required more effort, the next time much less effort, the third time almost no effort, and then he was done. And this is really pretty standard of what we hear about hazing. So just in summation, what do you do if you see a coyote? Well, first of all, remember, it's not abnormal to see a coyote during the daytime. It doesn't mean that coyote is rabid or aggressive, as long as that coyote is afraid of you when he sees you. Again, put yourself in between if you have a pet or a kid. And if the coyote is not afraid of you, haze that coyote. Be big and loud. Use any of these techniques that we described. If there's a coyote in your neighborhood, there's probably a reason why. So it may not be in your yard, it might be in your neighbor's yard. So look for and try to talk to your neighbors in a friendly way about what they might be doing to attract coyotes into their yard. So again, if there's nothing else you got from this, I hope you know, never ever feed coyotes, intentionally or unintentionally. And then in conclusion, to prevent coyote conflicts, we do have to change our behavior by removing food attractants, taking precautions with pets, teaching kids a little bit about what to do if they see a coyote. We do have to change the behavior of those problematic coyotes with hazing, and we all have to work together for this to work. This is my information here. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Also on our website here, and I know City of Huntington Beach, on your website you have fact sheets as well, but we also here too that you can print out and get more tips of the things that I just went over today. So thank you.